There's one woman of the early Christian church I can guarantee you've never heard of. But let me tell you, this woman was a freaking powerhouse and trailblazer centuries before her time. And her name is Egeria. And this is how she rocked the ancient and modern world. Every year, over 2 million souls venture to the Holy Land, tracing the steps of Jesus in biblical history. And loads of folks see this pilgrimage as spiritually transformative, but few can imagine spending 3 whole years on a journey like that. Fewer still could guess that the earliest named pilgrim from the Holy Land from Europe was a woman named Egeria, who did exactly that between 381 and 384 AD, leaving us a record of what she found. But first, let's talk about this idea of Christian pilgrimage. And we got to zip through this, so hang tight. For the first 2 to 3 centuries of the church's existence, there was a strong belief that God was present in the world and believers through the Holy Spirit, rather than certain places like church buildings and temples. And as I cover in the Ultimate Bible History for Believers course, after the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD and the city's utter obliteration by the Romans, both Judaism and the growing new faith of Jesus Christ spread far from where it began, and cities like Caesarea, Antioch, and Ephesus were now more important to Christian adherents. And as far as Jerusalem's historic sites went, there just wasn't much there for early Christians. It was mostly newer structures on top of burned out rubble, and where the Temple of Jerusalem once stood, instead there was now a temple to the goddess Venus. There was almost nothing of that city that still stood from the days of Jesus. But then Constantine and the legalization of Christianity in 313. And Constantine was big on architecture and creating centralized places of worship, and he put in place extensive building plans throughout Palestine. And although Constantine never visited Jerusalem, his mother Helena was all about it and about finding sacred sites and sacred relics. And so places such as the location of the rediscovered tomb of Christ, the Mount of Olives, etc., they had large churches built on top of them. And soon it became an active religious service to go and visit these places. And accounts began circulating of pilgrims venturing to and walking in the steps of the biblical writers, such as the anonymous pilgrim of Bordeaux, who in 333 AD listed out places that people should see when they went on these pilgrimages. But it would be Egeria who was the first to write thoroughly of her experience traveling to the Holy Land. She traveled from her home in Spain to Egypt, Israel, and Syria, searching out these sacred places and meticulously documenting her experiences in her travel diary, capturing her observations, interactions, and the profound spiritual significance of the places that she visited. And most importantly, this diary journey to the holy places provided first-hand insights into early Holy Land Christian liturgy. But here's the crazy thing. Egeria's chronicles, while well known amongst the ancients, might have been completely lost had they not been chanced on in 1884 in an Italian library. The manuscript brought Egeria's fascinating journey back to life for modern readers. And one of the first sites she visited was Mount Sinai, as she was eager to dive deep into the biblical events like Exodus. And upon reaching Mount Sinai, where we all know Moses received the 10 Commandments, Egeria describes the ridiculously difficult journey up the mountain, which she took entirely on foot, describing her journey as straight up the whole way as if up a wall. But she didn't stop there. Using the Bible as her guide, she journeyed across the Mediterranean, visiting places tied to patriarchs, prophets, and biblical heroes. And at each location, she engaged with local clerics to understand their customs. And her visits might include climbing a mountain or drinking from a biblical stream. And typically upon arriving at a site, she'd pray, read a Bible verse, sing a psalm, and then offer a concluding prayer. And Egeria's narratives offer deep insights into the ancient world's religious sites and the ceremonies at those places, while also highlighting the role of women at that time. And through her accounts of conversations with local clergy and descriptions of traditions at each place she visited, she literally presents a direct snapshot into the faith and rituals of early Christians that otherwise would have been lost. And a striking feature of her travels is her use of the Bible as the guiding compass. For Egeria, these sacred sites she visited were more than just geographic places. They were extensions of her understanding of the biblical narrative and giving her supremely deep dive into the scriptures that very few at the time had access to. And interestingly, she also took a detour to visit the shrine of Thekla in Seleucia. And if you know your early women of the Christian faith, this visit is a big deal. Thekla, much like Egeria, was an affluent Christian woman who embarked on her own spiritual Mediterranean voyage way before Egeria's time. And I'll be covering Thekla soon, so if you don't know anything about Thekla, get ready. But from Egeria's writings, the story of Thekla obviously had a tremendous impact on her own journey. And the accounts of both women reveal that they weren't just observers of their faith. They ardently pursued experiences enriching their spiritual insights and really pioneering the way for loads of folks. And what's beautiful about Egeria's diary is that it really debunks these preconceived notions we have about women in antiquity, particularly the idea that they were restricted from experiencing the pleasures of travel, exploration, conversation. And not only did she and many other women of that era journey across vast terrains, but they also engaged actively with the world around them, redefining the perception of women taking a quiet role in ancient Christian history. Egeria was bold, daring, and she challenged preconceived traditional notions of Christian women then and now, 1,600 years later. And across her travels, she met with monks, guides, religious leaders who offered her deeper insights into the sites and their biblical significance. And her zeal to understand the scriptures is really evident. She traveled to prominent biblical sites like Mount Nebo, where Moses met his end, Haran, home to Job's tomb, Abraham's house, all over the place. Her time in Jerusalem was the highlight of her pilgrimage, though, because it offers us an invaluable view into 4th century Jerusalem Christian worship. And these liturgical practices, especially during Holy Week, were focused on reenacting events in Jesus' life, retracing his final steps, including moments at the Mount of Olives, Gethsemane, before Pilate. And Egeria's account did more than just document her journey. They influenced later Christian liturgy. Her descriptions, particularly of Holy Week, left a lasting mark on worship traditions, many of which still are around today. And Egeria's writings also offer a rare glimpse into early Christian practices, things like baptism. Through her eyes, we see how much the church emphasized personal righteousness, community testimony, and thorough evaluation before welcoming new believers in baptism. Egeria, she's a big deal, folks, and most of us have never heard her name. This woman blazed a trail across the Holy Land that people are still following today. In knowing the works of Egeria, we get a glimpse into the earliest Christian faith traditions, the early foundations of religious travel literature, and the profound impact of pilgrimage. But above all, we're reminded of the incredible mark a single adventurous woman left on ancient Christian history and worship that still inspires us today. God bless.